Lives we've led, the lives we've yet to lead. New day, new ideas, a new you.
This is it. Our legacy rests on this one episode, Scott.
Yeah, I know. And
we
yet,
must come up with astounding insights tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Stellar brilliance. So, Mad Men. So, I think Mad Men, according to you, I think, had a lot to do with you taking on this book project.
Absolutely, because the book comes out of the blog, and the blog started. I don't know how we were originally planning to do it. Like, what was our first idea? To just do something on rockcritics.com, maybe, and then
I don't remember.
Let's do a whole blog, or
yeah, I don't
either
recall.
But it all started with Mad Men, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, in the book, you've chosen a particular song, but we're going to do a little more expansive conversation than that, I guess.
Yeah, and nothing was harder than choosing one song from Mad Men. I mean, honestly, if I were honest, I think there are 117 songs in there. I could easily 8, 9, 10.
Yeah. So, we tried to think of a way to shape a conversation so we wouldn't just ramble all over the place, because obviously we could go on forever. And you came up with a little bit of a roadmap, I guess, to follow, a series of questions that you sent, and I've gone through them. I've sort of thought of some answers to most of them.
Okay.
I'm sure some of my answers may be a little redundant with your own, but that's okay. They're all sort of just to give us a liftoff point.
Yeah,
to discuss the music and the show in general. But I mean,
we're going to try to focus on the music, because you could talk. We could do a whole separate podcast on the show and not mention the music.
Oh, sure. Do you want to start with anything general, just about the use of the music in the show, or do you just want to dive into the questions and approach it that way?
Just say that it used music in a way. I've said this about virgin suicides and other things, in a way that I've never seen it really used, because it's television, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what Mad Men does with music, you can't do that in a movie, because there's only one closing credits in a movie. Mad Men, you have 7 seasons times 13 episodes, and even though, and we'll talk about this, the idea of the closing song didn't kick in immediately, at a certain point you're looking at more than half the run, so you get to do something 50 times instead of once.
Mm-hmm.
And it just I never thought music over the closing credits of a television show would ever become so important to me. If you'd asked me about that before I'd watch Mad Men, do you think one day you'll rank the closing credits of a television show with Scorsese and all the other stuff you love? I would have laughed. It would have made sense.
Now, you did mention it in the Sopranos conversation. Would you now consider the Sopranos, was that just sort of a precursor?
Yeah.
It didn't go quite as far as Mad Men, but it did sort of start the trend, I guess.
Yeah, if I'd watched everything in order, as these were playing on TV, because Sopranos starts, I think, 1999.
Yeah.
And Mad Men doesn't, actually, I don't think Mad Men started until after The Sopranos was finished.
Yeah, it was over, yeah.
So for sure, it kind of put down a roadmap. But and it is great. And I said, I missed that the first time. There are closing songs that are just phenomenal, as good as Mad Men, but not as often. Not as often.
Yeah, and I don't think, although I'd be curious to know, because I wasn't following The Sopranos at all while it was first on, I should say. And I don't think there was the thing we should mention maybe about Mad Men is that, and we commented on this at the time, like by maybe even earlier, but for sure by the final season, every week almost people would be discussing in particular the final song, right? And before the final episode, as we know, there were plenty of things online to read about people, doing exactly what we did, guessing what the final song might be. I don't think that kind of mania occurred with The Sopranos.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, did anybody ever say what is going to be the final song? on The Sopranos? That's a
Yeah.
good question.
Like it was huge.
doubt-
I remember the day after the Sopranos episode that was all over,
Oh,
the
yeah.
internet about the journey and all that. But I
Yeah.
don't remember there being something leading up to it. But I
was
wasn't
surprised.
tuned in to the same way,
Yeah.
so we might have just missed it. But
Let me take 7 seconds to mention in passing that I taught a girl this week, what grade was I doing? 5, 6, name Journey.
oh,
So
really?
I finished the day by playing Don't Stop Believing. Not
Did
the
you?
Sopranos clip, but
That's great.
she said she didn't know it, and then I played it, and then she said she was lying. She doesn't like the song, and she's sick of people talking to her about it.
Oh, that's at least she was honest with you. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to
Sure.
dive into the
Yeah, and
questions?
so the first, I just drafted up these sort of loose general questions. Do you think the centrality of music, how important it was that in Matthew Weiner's mind? Weiner, you think I know how to say it?
I think it's Weiner. I've heard enough people say it that way, so I assume
Is
that's
that
where
in Matthew Weiner's mind right from the start, or did it develop gradually and over time? What do you think?
And maybe we should say one thing I did hear in a tiny bit of research I did is that he actually was responsible for all the music choices. I was assuming, are we just talking about a team of people? And apparently he was the central person. I'm sure he had some help with it, but
wow,
someone insisted that no, the choices were his. He was considered the music director, apparently. So
okay, because I didn't get that sense about David Chase with The Sopranos. Some songs were definitely his choices, but I had the feeling that others he had very little to do with.
So it's a good question for that reason.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
I think absolute. Like when so I should say I've watched it now twice. I just finished my second viewing, literally yesterday, with a what was it, a 5-year gap in between or something. And no, I think absolutely. I think the show. I feel like the show was conceived with music in mind as being really central to it from the get-go. Like the music that most gets to me in the show doesn't really begin to show up until later, so it takes on a different flavor in that way. Like it starts to impact me more, when pop music, well, rock music, we should say, I guess, because it's all pop in a certain way. But when rock starts to come into the picture, that's when it's on a more consistent basis starts to get to me. But no, watching those early episodes, I feel like the use of the songs and even in the final scenes are as integral to what's going on in the show as anything else. It's the set design and the costumes and the whole bit. I never felt there was I didn't feel that it sort of changed over time. I think maybe in the audience's mind, again, because I think once the rock era hits, everyone, in our age group and even somewhat younger can relate more to stuff like the Kinks and the Beatles and so forth.
Right.
But I feel that those song choices were very deliberate. And I feel like some of the episodes even kind of, you could hear in those songs themes from the episodes coming out. So that's my thought. I don't know.
Okay, I think I mostly agree, but I think they're feeling their way a little bit in the first season. And the reason I say that is sometimes, yes, there's period music and it's used the same way that the pop or rock the rock music is later used. But also a lot of the first season, as I looked over the music in the first season, they use a lot of, and I wrote down his name, David Carbonara. They use a lot of his score. And in some episodes, in fact, I think a couple of episodes, it was just David Carbonara and one song maybe. And his score is really good. Actually I love, and I found out the name of it. I checked it. He had 2 songs on YouTube from Madman. One of them's called The Carousel.
Okay, yeah.
This episode, back episode. And that's the piece of music that they use again and again. I love that. You would recognize it immediately. It's very beautiful and kind of evocative and moody. So I think they're feeling away a little bit because they use a lot of his. And then the one thing that everybody talks about, and they never did this again, they used that one contemporary song.
Yeah,
who was that's true. Again?
The Decemberists.
The Decemberists,
and apparently they use a Cardigan song too, but it's one of those Cardigan songs. Like some of the Cardigans' early music had that kind of loungy pop feel, so you might be fooled to thinking it's something else. So there's specifically two instances of that. No, I'll just say I think they made a couple missed calls maybe in that regard.
I think that was one of them for sure. That just seemed wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I put it wasn't, and I put the word central in quotation marks in a way, and I don't know if this is, I just sort of picked it out of the air. I thinking it's not 100% central until Satisfaction Place. When he steps out of that building, it seems like that's now music is not, it's central to the show and it's central to everything that's going on in the world.
Well, and that's
At
interesting.
least in the United States.
Well, and the one quote from the show, and it's a little later than the Satisfaction. I think it is. I think it's in the Beatles episode, and I think you're the one who maybe pointed this right out to me. The Tomorrow Never Knows episode.
Okay, because
but isn't there right? There's some other instances of them, but isn't there the one line where Don actually says to Megan, like, so this ties into what you're saying.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Doesn't he say, like, when did music become so important or something? So maybe that proves your point right there. Like,
it's almost like, yeah, maybe they're making a joke about it. Yeah, that was the perfect segue into, how I wanted to open the book. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think what made Don say that. It was just something about it. He hadn't even heard Tomorrow Never Knows yet, because that was almost Megan saying to him, here's why music is so important.
Here's what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, he was saying it in response to something. They were trying to hire a band for an ad or something. Yeah.
Well, and there was a funny part in that someone quoted this, where I think there was that one episode. I don't know if it's the same episode. I think it might have been a bit earlier. But yeah, they're trying to find Beatles-like music to use in an ad, and someone brought in this really kind of lame-sounding 60s pop. But Don actually says something like, "No, we said we can't use the Beatles, or we don't want to use the Beatles." And someone said that kind of suggests that he thought it might have been the Beatles. Like he's that not in tune to what's going on. And I think there's something to that.
No, but the way I remember, Don was the guy. It was Harry. I think it was Harry that thought, well, we'll just get any band. They all sound like the Beatles. But Don was the guy that knew the Beatles were special, and that this makeshift Beatles that they put in just wouldn't work.
Interesting.
Because he's not a music guy, but he's an ad guy.
Yeah.
We'd have to check and see who's right, but that's
interesting. Yeah, no, and maybe it's left open a little bit too, right? Like I don't think that's interesting. Okay.
So we mostly agree that even though they were feeling their way a bit, music was in his mind from the start, and this has to be part of the show. Mm-hmm. So the next thing I wanted to ask you was the first, and I've got two answers to this. The first musical moment that really registered for you. And we've talked about how TV series, not talking about music, they have a moment or an episode where you think, wow, this is a lot more than I thought it was going to be. And you said for The Sopranos, it was the episode where they go on the road trip, right? And to check out colleges.
Right.
Which I didn't, and you know what? The guy that, those guys that wrote the book too, they kind of thought that was a turning point. But now we're talking about a song. So what was it?
So I have to think back. I have to think to this viewing of the show, because I can't sort of put my mind back into when I originally watched it, obviously. Yeah. So that it's actually, and this is a kind of interesting one talking to you about this, and I didn't even think to look up who this was by until like a few days ago when I knew we were going to do this. It was Don McLean. Actually ended a show. Did you? And I was wondering, did you know that? Like, it's so bizarre. And it's a song from the American Pie album, I think, and it's actually used very similar to the Peter, Paul, and Mary, because this is why I wouldn't have thought to look up they make it seem like it's actually being played live in the show, but no, it's actually Don McLean, and it's I think it's the end of the 6th episode or something, season 1, and the song is called Babylon.
Babylon, you know what? When I played this a while ago, I heard it and I knew that, and I realized it was from Mad Men. Yep, I know.
And I just love the way it was used. It's after it's a scene where he's in the bar with the beatniks, and there's poetry going on, and he's sparring with the woman he's seeing. He's sparring with their friends. They have this great, hilarious banter back and forth. And then it just sort of goes into this calm thing where there's this sort of folky band. They look like a very 1961 version of a folk band, beatnik kind of folk. And they start playing, but they do make it look like they're performing it. But the camera cuts away pretty quickly and does, like sort of a great Mad Men style of montage. and it's just got
Yeah,
a
I
really
remember the
spooky sort
montage
of
of all the
sound.
different characters.
And it's got that kind of early folk sound that I just really like. It's got that sort of spooky and somber and
Yeah,
really, I don't know if I call it pretty because it's a little minor key-ish, but
yeah,
yeah.
no,
And when I watched it this time, I was like, wow, that is great. Like
that
what?
is a great moment. But wait a minute, are you telling me, Scott, that they're using the Don? I thought Don McLean on this was covering an old folk song, and I
Well,
thought
he
that,
might be. I don't know. Like that might be. It
yeah,
probably is an old folk song, but the version they play is Don McLean.
it is Don.
I watched it on YouTube. You can
Wow,
find it. Actually, it's kind of funny. Someone posted on YouTube the clip, but they identify the song as Rivers of Babylon. So look up
that's
Mad
when
Men, Rivers of Babylon.
that's when Don went into the reggae.
Bodie version, yeah.
That's amazing. That really is. But yeah, I remember the scene and remember the montage. And
So without giving anything away here, Phil, grist for the mill or whatever, right? So,
yeah, everybody, you're wondering why so
what are they
interesting.
talking about? Yeah.
So I wrote down two answers, and believe it or not, because they're different levels of like really registering.
Right,
They're
right.
both the first season. One is the first episode.
Yeah.
When they come in with Vic Damone at the end and on the street where you live, that is great.
That is
That
amazing,
really
yeah.
is, because it's the first time we see that Don has a wife and he has two kids. And there's something, I looked it up. He didn't, Dean Martin had a bigger hit with it. I think Nat King Cole did too, or at least those are the first two that came up on when I searched the song. But it's just perfect. And that really registered with me. But then another level was, you probably know what I'm going to say, the last song in the first season when they put
Don't
in
Think
Dylan's
Twice.
Don't Think Twice.
Yeah.
And I can't even describe the effect that had on me the first time, second time, third time. I think it's because it's the first time maybe where you realize that music's going forward, whether Don and Roger and all these, music is moving forward. And at least those two characters, Don and Roger, are going to be playing catch up the whole show, because Dylan at that point has no connection to their world at all. It comes from another world, right? And it's just, once they use Dylan, I think that's also when I realized, wow, they can use anything. It's not going to be. And another thing, when we talk about music developing, when they put a show on the air, they don't know if it's going to last one season or 6 seasons. So
yeah.
When they put in Dylan there, maybe they had already signed to a second season and they were trying to free themselves a little bit from the 50s kind of music,
Yeah.
And that's just such a great moment for me. And it almost as good was when they used the song for Woody, when they used Dylan the second time.
Yeah.
When Sally was so, disturbed by the arrival of baby Jean, and then Don takes her and sits with her and the baby, and it's posed almost like a painting.
Yeah, no.
Just great. So those would be my two choices.
My original choice, before I actually looked up the Don McLean, because I was just trying to think, well, which one did I actually recall? And it was actually going to be, and this is a song I learned from, I basically found out about from you many years ago, is Sukiyaki, which I also thought was
true.
Used really well. That's in season 1 as well.
Waitress, I mean, she's gorgeous. She walks in, and clearly she's trying to pick up Don, right?
Yeah, and it's just so great. And to me, that's a very good example. So is the Vic Damone, obviously, but it's a great example of, that music is going to matter in this show, and he's really like trying to say something with it. I actually looked up I was looking up the Sukiyaki. I'm full of facts today, but this one is actually very interesting. And I think Mad Men is full of this stuff. It's like subtext like crazy. But so Sukiyaki is, who is it? Kiyo Sakamoto, right?
Yes.
So it's in that what that episode is the one where they I think it was about an American Airlines crash, and I think Pete's father was on that plane or something.
Yeah.
Right? And in the same episode is when they dumped their contract with this Mohawk Airlines, because they were going to go with American Airlines. Yeah. They the episode ends with Sukiyaki. Kiyo Sakamoto died in a plane crash.
That's interesting. Absolutely.
Crazy. Isn't that like nuts? Like, now it was in the 80s, apparently, like 85 or something. But, so people saying, was this? And I'd say, yeah, probably might be something to that,
Wouldn't doubt it at all. Wouldn't doubt it at all. So that did end the episode, right?
It did end the episode, yeah.
That was great. And there's other stuff, I mean, Sukiyaki was a hit in '61. I keep saying, I always call it Sleepy Time '50s music, but they're actually already into '60. I was going to say that Don Cherry song, Band of Gold, which they
Right.
used twice in the first season, and then they bring it back, I think, for the seventh season or the sixth season.
Oh, really?
It's probably the only song that was ever used 3 times in the show. So sort of carrying along with that idea, did they continue with that kind of '50s music too long? Should rock and roll have taken over sooner?
So I have two answers to this
Okay.
one. On a personal gut level, I'll admit when I was watching it the second time, there were some stretches where I was like, man, I felt like there was going to be more sort of like the kind of pop music I really love, and I felt like it didn't feel like there was as much as I had sort of remembered, especially in the first few seasons.
Right.
But the other answer is, in terms of being true to the show and true to what the show is about, I think it actually sort of makes sense, the decision to do that. And if you, as you've no doubt noticed, like even if it's not necessarily '50s stuff, that sort of lounge stuff and stuff from earlier eras, it even shows up like as late, like well into the seventh season. Eh? Like there's a Dean Martin song like towards the end.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense thematically because, I think the show really, as we all know, is kind of like about a conflict between these characters trying to muddle their way through the '60s,
and they're much more
comfortable. Yeah, they're much more comfortable. So I think, but on a personal level, there were times when I thought, that we're in 1963 now. I kind of want to hear like a Ronettes song or something like that. But it didn't, But it's good for what it was. I mean, what they did. So
I wish they had used the Ronettes. Did they use the crystals? He hit me.
Yeah, and I don't really remember that. Like it's in there.
Yeah.
But I just, for some reason, it's not one of the memorable ones to me. Weird. It's not one of my favorite songs by them. That's for sure.
No, it's a weird song. I said, maybe a bit sooner because there is a long gap. If you call the twist the first bit of rock and roll, that's season 1, episode 8. When the next bit of rock and roll comes up? Like Tobacco Road, which starts season 4.
Wow.
So they go season 2 and season 3. They mix in some folk. They mix in Simon and Garfunkel, I think, Peter, Paul, and Mary, which does reflect the times because before the Beatles come, folk is like a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
Not just
and in New York,
commercially too. They had #1 folk songs. So I can go either way on that. Yeah, like you, subjectively, I probably wanted a bit sooner, but it works. It doesn't need drastic changing or anything.
Yeah.
The next one, I didn't really know how to answer this. I thought of the Kale quote, why she liked the music in Mean Streets more than Goodfellas, because she said the music in Mean Streets came right out of those characters' lives. They knew the music they were playing on the jukeboxes. De Niro dancing to Mickey's Monkey, whereas Goodfellas, she thought it was just layered. It's Scorsese. It's just layered on, and those characters, they don't know Cream and they don't know Donovan. They don't know all this stuff. So what I wrote, you got the disconnect is fine because Don and Roger, they're creatures of the '40s and '50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes the series, like you said, that tension between them. So that's there, and it's fine because that's what it's about. It's them trying to, women love them, but they're out of sync with the world, right? Even the younger ad agency characters, they don't really exhibit any special attachment to music like Peggy or certainly not Pete. Really, in a way, Sally's, insane excitement over the Beatles is probably the most vocal and visible demonstration of someone who is caught up in the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I pretty much agree with what you're saying. I mean, my first sort of response to the question was that, I think Cale's description is accurate, but I don't see it as being a problem.
I think the music, and you do, we think the music in Goodfellas is great.
Here's one thing I do think is a bit interesting, though, maybe, is that I think, like, in some ways, when I think about it, in Goodfellas, it is even less connected to the characters or to the scenery, whatever, than it is in Mad Men. Because when you think of a song like when you think of something like Layla in Goodfellas, it's pure like it's pure scenery or whatever. But like
Yeah.
it's great, and he emphasizes it. He turns it up and all that. But at least with the stuff in Mad Men, like if you think of, and I'm sure we'll probably get to this song at some point, but the friend and lover song, Reach Out for the Darkness, it's like, yeah, I don't like it would be there in the background of their lives, whether they were interested in it or knew anything about it or not. Like it would be part of that actual scenery. So it's a Goodfellas thing feels even more disconnected. But I think, just what they do with it, it doesn't, I don't, yeah, like there's something special about how it's used in Mean Streets. I agree with that, but it's different. But they're young people in Mean Streets too, right? So it's just used differently.
Yeah.
So,
and obviously Don's not oblivious. I mean, he bought Sally Beatles tickets, right?
Yeah.
And he sought out the Rolling Stones. I think that was his idea for a commercial. I don't know if that came from the client or that idea was the clients or theirs. It might have been the clients.
One thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's all I'm saying, that he's aware. He had to be, because that was his business. So in a glancing sort of way, he was aware.
The one thing that did strike me, and because it's in one of the final, I think it's like about maybe midway through season 7, is they use My Way, and it's not, and that seems like one of the only scenes where music it actually is there. Like there's not that many scenes I could think of where like stuff like Sukiyaki and all that stuff in the Dylan, like they are still just, it's more like commentary on the scene. I guess Satisfaction is a little bit unclear. Or is it unclear? Like, do they actually show someone playing a radio?
I thought it was unclear. Is it being played off someone's radio?
Yeah, the Beach Boys one is clear. Like that one, I think, is playing at the LSD party or whatever. And but there's very little where it's actually right there, right? So
the minister who takes out his guitar and starts playing at the end of one episode of Father John or whatever his name is.
Right, and that's similar to the Don McLean a little bit too, actually.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. Damn, you just made me think of something. I just skipped up from my mind. Anyway, so yeah, I know what I was going to say. I think probably the most musically connected character in the show is probably Megan, right?
That's interesting. Yeah,
she sings the infamous song. She gives Don the Beatles album to play. I think she mentions a couple things at other points, so she's right on top of things. But certainly people like Harry and even who's the guy that becomes takes up Hare Krishna. I can't.
Is it Paul? Is it Paul? I think is his first name.
Kinsley. Paul Kinsley.
Kinsley.
He doesn't seem to know anything about music.
Yeah. And Harry's hilarious in that Rolling Stones episode. Like he's just completely clueless.
I know. All he's interested is the groupies hanging around.
Yeah.
So let me skip down here, Scott. Now, I don't know if this is a good question. Ending every episode with a song, did that click in for you in such a way that you were just waiting in anticipation, or did you find it? I know some people find it kind of lazy and predictable.
Well, if I put I was looking back at my own comments that we had written initially about the music in Mad Men, and I think I was actually a little more negative than I realized, because I think I actually said that exact thing, that at certain points it became a little bit perfunctory, like what's the last song going to be?
I know,
and there were a few moments where I noticed this viewing that there were a few that kind of don't really do much. Okay. But they still sound great. That's the thing. Like a good example of that is the Porpoise song. Like I even watched it again on YouTube, and it's like there's nothing really special about it at all. But when it came on, I totally forgot that it had been in Mad Men, and it's like, oh, this sounds great. Like it's the Porpoise song. Like, this sounds so good.
There's some overlap, I think, between the Sopranos and Mad Men, because I think the Porpoise song was written by Fred Neil. And I know Fred Neil ends one episode where Michael Purioli is just really strung out on, is the heroin habit. So Fred Neil's used in both of those. They used a different Fred Neil song.
Okay. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about the use of it?
Now and again, something. Most of the time, I loved it, and I loved waiting and guessing. When they picked a song, I loved it. It's just the greatest thing in the world. But then sometimes, and I'm not trying to pick on Bowie. I thought Space Oddity was kind of a rote choice. I found it odd that they went back to the Buddy Holly right at the end.
That was a bit weird.
Thematically, it worked because we're in the second last episode, and again, Don is still Don, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's going west. He's almost going back to his 1950s self. So it does kind of make sense. But I, of course, wanted something from 72. And so now and again, it hit me as perfunctory. But overall, I'm glad they got into that pattern, that rhythm. And I just waited around anticipation what's going to end this episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now go to specific music, Scott. Try to think of one episode where music, you just thought it matched the moment perfectly, and then the opposite that we talk about, where you use music that it's just in stark contrast to what's going on or the mood or something like that, and it works just as well, if not better, sometimes.
You want me to go first?
You go first.
I'll go for the first one,
sure.
I guess.
Okay.
So I have two that are very obvious examples, but I just can't dismiss them. Their obviousness is not a problem to me.
Yeah.
Satisfaction, which we've already mentioned, and I'll say a little bit about why, and the Beach Boys song. And I think the thing about Satisfaction for me is that there's just something like visually about that it just like I'm roughly the same age as you, a little younger, but I've always kind of felt close enough to that period that I wasn't there, but I just feel that would be a very accurate depiction of what it might have been like on a summer day in 1965 to hear Satisfaction playing on the radio. Like nothing major happens, but I even love the way, for instance, like when Don's, and everyone's seen the scene and Don's standing against the wall smoking or whatever outside the gym. And just even having that black couple walk by, there's just something visually about that is just so.
That's perfect.
It's everything is like and Satisfaction really does kind of mark like almost a next phase after the Beatles, right? It's like we're going to take it even further now. Like you thought the Beatles were wild. Like watch.
I think all the people that walk by him are perfect. There's the black couple. There's a couple of women that walk by, I think, together, and they just seem so confident.
Yeah,
like a new kind of woman, And I think there might be. Is there somebody military that walks by? I can't remember.
There might be. Yeah.
All the people that pass are perfect, and you're right. Summer is perfect. It's got to be summer. Don puts on his shades. I laugh because he's just come from a workout. The first thing he does is he lights a cigarette.
Smoke exactly.
I mean, you could do a whole podcast right on tobacco on that show. It's
it's amazing.
That's just a phenomenal moment that, we talked about this often, took a song that like Deader Than Dead for me and brought that to life.
And quickly, I'll just say on the Beach Boys.
Interesting that you chose two non-episode ending songs.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. I think the thing about the Beach Boys, like, I think in some ways it's so true to the moment because I was thinking about it, like, the LSD sort of experience as a kind of more mass phenomenon and stuff, was really a couple years later, like because I think in that one it's still 65 or maybe 66.
Still legal.
But I don't think LSD like had sort of reached mass. Like I don't think it was in, Haight Ashbury wasn't a thing yet, right? And
we should mention that the song we're talking about, God Only Knows, right?
No, it's that's an even
I just wasn't made
for these times, which of course could be the theme of the whole show, right?
Yeah,
it's title alone.
And you're right, thematically perfect. Is played during Roger's acid trip with his ex-wife and some Timothy Leary type.
I refer to her as sweet, sweet Lady Jane, but
sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's good. So. It just like I do like LSD at that point. I've actually, I've even read a book about LSD. It's a very sort of fascinating journey, the way that went. And really in those early days, like meaning not the early days, but when it first started to get in the Tim Leary world and all that, it was really sort of like sort of the college professor crowd and sort of more middle class, upper class people. Yeah. And that's kind of where they were. And it just seems like, yeah, like something like Pet Sounds would have been a contemporary record at the time. But like we've grown up watching so many movies where every time there's like an LSD trip or something, it's going to be to Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin. Yeah. And really LSD, like I think the whole LSD, and not just LSD, but drug culture in general. I mean, I think the Beach Boys were kind of so much more pivotal to that and people sort of understand that now. But for many years in the 70s and stuff, because Pet Sounds wasn't really an album that was in favor for a long time, right? Didn't have the cachet that it does now. I just thought it was a really inspired choice that just again seemed really true. Like someone might have had the new Beach Boys album at their pad and they put it on, and it was ended up just being.
And what did they mix it with?
Well, it mixed with some like classical piece or something, and it starts blending and getting all woozy, and it's brilliantly edited. So yeah, it's great.
No, those are great choices. A couple of mine are obvious, and then the third one is just going to run completely counter to what you just said. Both Sides Now. It just captures that mood of just nostalgia. Don talks about nostalgia being an ache in the heart, I think, during the carousel. And I'm glad, in a way, they used the Joni Mitchell instead of, that they used the Judy Collins instead of the Joni Mitchell.
Oh, I definitely agree with that.
It just seems right. It was the hit, and
it's got that it's got that harpsichord AM
something about it. Yeah, I like Joni Mitchell's. It's her song. I like her. I don't want to calling it her version seems wrong. It's her song. I like her recording of it a lot, her original. But I'm glad they used the Judy Collins, and that just takes. It's hard for me to think of that moment. Stepping out of the car and Don saying, "This is where I grew up," and that look that he and Sally exchanged. So I can't imagine it. That's how great it is. I can't imagine doing that with another song. Like I can't. Yeah. There's no song in the world that would fit that moment like that song fits it.
And you'll probably never hear that song again and not think of that, right?
Absolutely. And if anybody else tries to use that song in a film, I think they're foolish, or a TV show that is owned by now Mad Men. Another one that I just love is Peggy at the Elevator after she's just quit, and the King Startup. You really got me, because so it's such a serious, somber scene that precedes it. I mean, I think Dawn's on the verge of tears. I think she's on the verge of tears. But as soon as she gets that elevator, I can't remember if she smiles first or the song strikes up first. I think she
cracks first. A little smile, and then it goes right into the power chord.
And maybe that's what makes it. She smiles first, and you realize, they're pulling the rug out from under me. It was, you think she's distraught, and I think the rest of the agency was celebrating something at the time. They just got a huge contract.
And it's kind of a shock too, because it's like it is a pretty hard rock song, right? And you don't get a lot of aggressive music in the show.
You're right. You're right. And that's another one again. Song like Satisfaction. How many times have you heard "You Really Got Me"? And just jolted it back to life. The third one I'm almost embarrassed to say, because you're saying when they use drugs, they always use Hendrix or Joplin. I actually love when Pete gets stoned.
No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree, actually.
It is unimaginative, I know, but
no, it's funny because I look again in my comments from several years ago. I actually did list that as one of, I thought it was too perfunctory. I think I listed that.
It is in a way, and
but I actually watched it again, and I think just because it's Pete and it's just the way it's filmed. It does work. I definitely had a change of heart.
He took the joint out of anger. He was just fed up with everybody there being high and everything. So he was mad at something else. Give me that. And he sits down, and I think this woman,
the girl walks by.
It was just perfect. It might not have worked with Pete if whatever Stan had smoked a joint and they played that. It wouldn't have meant anything. I think it works with him. Here's something. I put down a song that is too perfect. It works, but it is kind of too perfect and too obvious. Where the end of the Kennedy, they use Skeeter Davis's "The End of the World." I mean, it works. I'm not complaining, but you think about it, it is kind of an obvious choice.
Slight overstatement, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like it does, and again, I also agree that it does work, and I found it
Does work, yeah.
kind of affecting. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's you could really draw a good contrast between the use of that and the friend and lover song for Robert Kennedy's death, which is almost like taking the complete opposite tack. And I do
That's my
think
next.
well, that's my,
So
and
my
I knew that
list.
was going
Is
to be
that your
yours.
contrast too?
Yeah, and I was going to sort of leave
Okay.
that up to you because I was going to say I have
Yeah.
a feeling this is going to be
No,
your
we
choice,
both
and I
agree.
fully agree with you. So,
Yeah. Although the only thing that it's not contrast is the idea of reaching out in the darkness, that this is a dark moment. But the rest of the song, yeah, you know, people are so groovy now. People are finally getting it together when the whole everything's just falling apart, right?
and it's so weird. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one thing I wanted to say about the Kenny episode. End of the World, is great as it is. I think the great moment in capturing the horror of all that is non-musical, and it's not Kennedy, it's Oswald, where Oswald gets shot, and Betty just like she says, "What is even going on?"
What's going on? Oh, it's amazing.
Like it, I can't think of anything would, and I was 2 years old. Anything that would better capture the just people just being totally baffled and perplexed.
Perfect. Yeah, they handle those kind of scenes so well, like the two assassination, well, the three assassinations, the Martin Luther King one, and the space, the landing on the moon is handled amazingly with the TV.
Those were the four
TV
big events,
as well.
and I
so
think
amazing.
They nailed every one of them. Yeah. Yeah, Reach Out in the Darkness is just great contrast because they don't even speak, right? She's watching TV Megan, Don walks in, they don't.
And what's amazing is it actually, and it's strange because the song itself seems to take on this kind of like weird edge while you're like, I found it like it doesn't, like, I don't know, there's something in the music itself that comes out that I don't think you would hear in that song otherwise, where it doesn't sound upbeat. It's something maybe not in the vocals. There's a bit of a sinister quality that actually comes out. It's really strange, like how like it's a genius like move to get that in and to make it work. So,
and I'll bet you that a lot of people who watch that didn't know that song because it was a hit in its day. But unless you're of a certain age, it's one of those hits that just kind of falls through the cracks. I'll hear it now and again on the radio.
Well, I only know it, as you know, through the Rochdale College movie.
That's right.
That was the first time I'd ever heard it. I had no clue of that song.
It's not like Sugar Sugar from 1969, or even probably you hear in the year 25 more than that.
By the way, you didn't choose Reach Out for the Darkness in your book for the Rochdale?
I did. I switched. I think I did. I think I switched at the last moment. I was originally going to use Spanky in your Spanky.
Right, like to get to know
Then I played it and it was too short, and I thought this way I could get in Reach Out in the Darkness. Yeah,
okay.
French Lover. I have that album, Okay, now I'm going to slightly disagree because you said at first I said, yeah, I think I agree, but you said there's a difference or there's no difference. I said ingenious contrast, which we just talked about. But now I'm saying one episode where you'd be hard pressed to explain why something is so perfect, because I picked 3 songs, and to me, the hard part to explain is, are they perfect or are they used as contrast? Like I can make an argument for both. And I'll tell you the songs I listed. Sorry, I gotta.
So the ones you're going to tell me now, these are ones that you just like are unexplainable.
That I have a hard time explaining why I think they're so perfect.
Yeah, okay.
Because I think partly they match the mood perfectly, and then partly I think no, they're used as contrast.
Okay.
So the ones I wrote, if I could just get this going, Scott, the ones I wrote were Love and Spoonful, Butchie's tune, which is the great Glenn. What would you do if you
driving the car?
Thing? I don't know why that works so brilliantly. First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, is that used as contrast, or does that just fit the moment perfectly? I don't know.
Yeah.
And another one, I just kind of threw in at the last minute. I had to look up the episode. I was pretty sure I knew it, but it ends with Dawn saying, every time we get a car, this place turns into a whorehouse. And Mama Cass's Words of Love starts up.
Ah, yeah, that is odd.
So all 3 of those, I think they're just amazing. And yet, again, I sort of split the difference between it's perfectly captures the mood, or it's just we can focus on one of them. The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. Like, what does that mean in that context?
Yeah, well, it's funny because actually I got to say, I'm not to quote myself here, but I was reading over my comments
Yeah.
that I had written on this thing we did years ago, and so what I wrote about the first time ever I saw your face, and I read this tonight, and I'm like, what am I talking about? I say one of the more unexpected shocks, doubly brilliant because it made so much sense after the fact, but I don't know what kind of sense it made that I was thinking of. Like,
Well, I mean, you
I
can.
don't. What was I thinking of? I must have had something in mind. I maybe should have explained
Well,
it because what
maybe
made
I don't
sense?
know.
I don't
What
know.
I have, my explanation of that song's perfection is that I actually think the Matthew Weiner and the makers of this program are commenting on John Hamm and Don Draper. Like he's now etched into television history. You know, obviously he's considered like just the handsomest guy in the world, and it's like Bogart or something. I think they're commenting on him in the context of that show and how he's going to outlast her. The image of Don Draper is going to last, and we're seeing Don at the end, and maybe we think back to the first time because we see that face in the very first scene, right? Him
Yeah,
sitting at
yeah.
the table. So that's where I think it's kind of perfect. But then you get into what's happened. He cleared out he's moving out
Yeah.
of his apartment. He's standing against the blank wall. How does that fit with the song?
And
Yeah.
it's so bizarre because I had totally sort of misremembered how that song was used. I wasn't, I mean, completely far off,
Yeah.
but for some reason, when I thought it was going to show up was when he was having the affair with what's Linda Cardellini's character
Linda Cardellini,
in
yeah.
season is that season 7, I think, or is that season 7 or 6?
It's 6 because he takes it with the waitress in 7, yeah.
And for some reason I had pictured that it showed up like after the relationship ended and he was maybe standing, because you know there's a few scenes where he's standing outside her door, and for some reason I thought that's what it was. So I remember when that sort of relationship ended, I thought, oh, I thought I was going to hear Roberta Flack by now. So I was kind of taken off guard again this time. And yeah, it's great. I mean, it's after the apartment empties out, but it's true. Like there's no, like, he hasn't had a connection right in that moment to like, you know, a face or something. Like he's dealing with that real estate agent or whatever. And that's clearly like there's no hint of any relationship or anything like that.
No,
So it just
that's
seemed
one of the
odd,
few
right?
women, yeah, that he just seems to be completely in there. No, I shouldn't say that, but
She's just a character.
Like on the up and up with her. There's no romantic spark or anything.
Yeah.
And now, if I remember correctly, as he stands against that wall, does the camera move back or does it just stay in?
Can't remember.
I seem to recall the camera.
It does move in one direction, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, now this is an easy thing. Did you discover any songs you'd never heard before? I've got 2. Butchie's tune, believe it or not, I'm pretty sure I'd never heard it. I have a Love and Spoonful best of. I don't think it's on that. And the other one I definitely had never heard of, which is this great soul song that's used, "Temptation Is Hard to Fight" by George McGregor and the Bronzettes. It's used in maybe second season. They're at a party, I think, and then it's used at the end.
Yeah, I looked back
at
when I was reading back your comments and you mentioned that song, and I actually I went and listened to it, and it's a great tune, but I have to admit I couldn't remember actually even after this viewing when it was actually used in the show, but it is a very nice song.
Yeah.
The only ones I listed, like my list is kind of small, at least in terms of songs. I mean, there's tons of songs I'd never heard before and wasn't familiar with. I really liked that, what's it, Ken Griffin Ebb-Tide, which opens, that's the organ song that opens up season 5. Sally's Bed. Was that a big hit? Really, eh?
It was Ebb-Tide, at least one version.
But that version, though?
I think a guy named Earl Grant had a huge hit.
Okay. Like it's the weirdest sounding. It's like honestly almost like an Eno-esque sort of thing or something. It's this weird like organ ambient music.
That's probably the Earl Grant, yeah.
And I mean, I have to qualify the statement though by saying it's great, but it still mostly lives within the show for me. Like I've put it on a playlist and I do enjoy it, but it's not like it's become one of my favorite songs of all time or whatever. But the otherwise, I mean, the two of the folk songs that we've mentioned were both new to me, and I love them both, the Peter, Paul, and Mary and the Don McLean, which I do think there's a very distinct parallel between those two scenes, and they sort of evoke the same period for me. So I put those, and the Lovin' Spoonful, I think I would probably include that as well. I'd never heard the song. There might be a few others if I looked through the list, but those are the ones that kind of stand out.
I think I'm wrong to say there's only two, because now that I think about it, I think that Peter, Paul, and Mary song might have been new to me. And I think there might have been a Waylon. There was a country song. It was really good, used at the end of Waylon Jennings or somebody like that.
Right, yeah.
Like Roger Miller or somebody. And I like that. I never heard it before. Look at your list. You know, when we originally did the first piece on the blog, it wasn't the first piece, but at one point we listed our 10 favorites. And did you majorly miss anything the first time? I jotted down. I really grew to like, over subsequent viewings, how On a Carousel is used. The Hollies.
Yeah.
I think is he on a plane at that point? And I think he might be on a plane. Picture him sitting there. Oh no, you know what? No, you know where he is? It's where he's been asked, he's bottomed out, and Piggy's asked him to write 10 tags. And he has that whole thing with Freddie, and Freddie says it's great. If you ever get sick of your job, think of Freddie. Do the work, Don.
Yeah, do the work. Yeah, just do the work.
He goes back, and he this morning everybody
starts
sits down to do that, and On a Carousel starts. I love that.
Yeah, it's funny. I put that out. So I sort of suggested that, you know, there's two types of misses. One of the ones that just like you either completely forgot about or didn't even hear at the time, and the others are that, well, I missed the greatness of it the first time. And in the latter category, the Hollies was definitely there, because again, I think I slagged that one along with the Hendrix and the Janis Joplin.
Oh, the Hendrix, I should add that too. Like that didn't click in with me the first time, and now I could probably put it in I think I did move it to my top 10, where they give Don all that whole list of conditions he's got.
It's great.
You don't know what he's going to say.
Yeah.
Like you think the old Don would just pick up and walk out of the room, and he goes, okay.
Yeah.
And then Hendrix starts, and it's so great.
No, it's great. Like those three, all those three songs from that era. I think I just thought, I would just for some reason thought they were too obvious the first time, but they all totally worked for me this time. So
I think they had a whole like string of episodes where every song nailed it for me. It's like season 5 or 6, where I thought, you know, wow, every time they just pick a perfect song.
The only one that I sort of could think of that I just sort of overall missed, like I didn't remember it at all. And I would say it's because it's not a great song, but it is used great, and it's a great moment in the show, is the Zombies song. Yeah. This Will Be Our Year. And it's the scene where Sally tells Donna, she leaves the car, she says, "Happy Valentine's Day, I love you." And it's such a shocking moment. Like he's almost in shock hearing the comment. And, you know, it's a very pretty, sort of warm, sort of Zombies type song. So it just works so well. And when I watched it this time, I think, God, I have no recollection of that at all from the first time. How did I miss it? I just thought it sounded so great. So
it is Odyssey and Oracle.
It is on that album. Yeah.
And you know what? I'll add one that grew in stature over time. I didn't miss it the first time, but and you can put it again. It's one of those ones where I have a hard time explaining why it's so perfect. Love Is Blue, Paul Moriarty's Love Is Blue.
Oh, yeah. When was that used again?
To end the Martin Luther King episode, the assassination.
Martin Luther King.
I think he's on the balcony just staring out. And, you know, I mean, partly you think, well, maybe they should have used an African-American artist in that episode. And Love Is Blue has no rock critic standing to speak of. I mean, it's just considered sort of a cheesy instrumental.
Yeah.
And it was just perfect for that. You know, capturing the sadness of that, but why it works? Like you could pick lots of music that would just be terrible in that choice, and that the context.
The only other one I'd quickly mention, and I know this is one that we don't really agree on, and I just completely forgot it was actually in the show. I wasn't looking up stuff in advance of watching the show the second time. Was Space Oddity. I really did kind of like that. Now, I like it briefly, though. Like, what I like is when the car first is pulling out and you hear the spacey music come in or whatever. Like, the rest of it kind of doesn't. But I just thought that was so perfectly executed. And again,
when he picks up the hitchhiker, right?
Yeah. And you actually hear a little bit of the ground control to Major Tom before that, but it's very faint. but the way it's edited, when he pulls out with the car, it goes into that spacey like part, and I just thought it sounded so great. But
I didn't mind it as much the second. I remember being very disappointed the first time. Second and subsequent viewings, it was okay. I didn't feel that strongly about it. So, and then the last thing I got down, Scott, and I think we probably can answer this pretty quickly. The new Seekers at the end, how did that hold up for you second time around?
I thought it held up extremely well. The only thing I would say about that is that, and this is kind of going back to your earlier comment about, you know, how you couldn't sort of do something like this in a movie, but being the final song, like I fully, like it didn't surprise me. It couldn't surprise me because it was so, like I knew it was going to be the very last song. With almost all those other songs, like I did have to play a bit of a guessing game. Like, oh yeah, when does that song come up, or what's going to end this episode?
This one,
like,
it's locked in. Yeah,
it's just locked in. And I mean, I think after that episode originally played, what year would that have been? What did the series end? 2015 or something, or
2016? I think. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure I watched that scene on YouTube over and over. So the scene was pretty etched in my mind. I mean, some parts sort of, you know, seemed fresh. I don't want to say it didn't seem fresh. Like it. Yeah. But no, I thought it held up really well. It's a perfect last song, but it's always going to be in there as the last song, and I don't think it can ever like fully surprise me in that way or something. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I first thing I put was I think it's better than The Sopranos, as much as I love last scene.
I agree.
I was thinking that all the suggestions that you and I made for songs before,
and you did mention it, by the way. You did mention it.
I mentioned it, but it wasn't.
I know you got your idea from someone, but still, that was pretty cool, though.
Yeah. I thought all our suggestions were good, and you really could have shaped how you come away from that show, how you view Dawn. You could have really changed that by the last song you used, or a whole bunch of ways you could have changed that. But I'm glad they did. You know, that song's just waiting, and he knew by the third season. I think that's how he was going to end it. That song was there. And as you pointed out, there are lots of references to Coke, at least 2 or 3 in those last couple of episodes, fixing the Coke machine.
Yeah.
And the way he says Coca-Cola. Cola. Or
I laughed this time when I saw it.
Who says it?
It's Jim Hobart. It's
right
in The Godfather. It's the senator, Senator Geary or
yeah.
whatever, right? Yeah. Corleone.
So yeah, I can't argue with it. He had a great idea. He stuck to it, and he made it work. And it's part of television history, right?
And it is great. I mean, the way he's, you know, in this not commune, I guess, whatever it is, the Esalen type place or whatever, and all these. Yeah. And it's great too. I just noticed too the way Don is even dressed, like, because he's got white on, but it's still a corporate shirt, but he's got it buttoned down a few, right? So it's just so perfectly done, that scene, and the way he cracks a little smile at the end.
Oh yeah, and also when you match the characters at the retreat to the commercial, especially the woman at the desk has the sort of native headgear on.
Yeah.
I was going to say that. I forgot.
I have a question for you, though.
A second to forget things. Go ahead.
So and I do remember the new Seeker song, obviously, at the time, in the commercial for sure. But did that song proceed? Like, was that song a hit in its original version on the radio, and then it became used as a commercial? Do you know?
I think that's one of the rare things that come after the commercial. It's good. I knew that at one time.
Worth looking that up, maybe. Yeah.
But I think it actually came after. Yeah. Well, I know what I was going to say. That I'm glad that Matthew Weiner, like David Chase, refuses to answer questions on the ending of The Sopranos, you know, whether Tony gets shot or not. Matthew Weiner just said, like within a day or two, yeah, you're supposed to conclude that Don went on to create, it was the guy that created the Coke commercial.
I didn't know he said that.
He confirmed it. I mean, I can understand why David Chase. The Sopranos ending is much more ambiguous.
Yeah.
But that night, I remember a guy on the message board said, "Yeah, maybe Don creates the Coke commercial," and somebody shot him down. Typically, and he was absolutely right. Matthew Weiner confirmed it.
Yeah, that's great.
I had one little factoid to mention. Did you know that Miles Davis's blue and green from, did you notice it from Kind of Blue is used in season 1?
It's yeah, I did catch that. Is
Okay.
it in the scene with the beatnik crowd or something?
Well, Dawn and
or-
Midge are in bed. That's all. I just saw it
Okay.
on TuneFind tonight. I'm sure when it played, I was very aware of it, but I don't remember it in retrospect. But yeah, it's with Beatnik Midge.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that was good, Scott. We didn't stick to 40 minutes, but we didn't do too badly.
Yeah, no, I think that was fun. So I think we covered it fairly
Okay.
adequately. So I'm sure we could go on many more contours. But that
No
was
higher
fun.
praise than fairly adequate.
Yeah. That'll bring us 13,000 views for sure.
I know. I think you should call this the podcast that promises to be fairly adequate.
Maybe I should label it Bob and Karen, Ted and Alice, and see if I just get it.
Maybe I gotta find, is any of that cast still alive? Because maybe one of them is sitting at home, right? I know Natalie Wood's dead. I don't know about Diane Cannon or Ellie Gould's dead. I know about Diane Cannon, Robert Culp.
Bizarre.
Okay, that was great, Scott.
Okay.
Let
Talk to you later, Phil.
Talk to you
Bye-bye.
later.